Sunday morning adult Bible class. I'm Dr. John McMath, working away slowly and at great expense through the books of Joshua and Judges. We're in Judges, about chapter 8 or so. And I understand that Peter Spring is going to be taking this hour beginning the 21st of September. So that gives me a couple more weeks to ponderously move through a few more chapters of Judges. I'm not terribly enthusiastic about getting the last few chapters. Those of you who've read those perhaps will understand why. There's only so much encouraging you can say about cutting your concubine up into 12 pieces for FedEx delivery to every part of Israel. There's only, after a while, you look at the phrase, there was no king in Israel and every man did what seemed right in his own eyes. That starts becoming a more discouraging phrase by the end of the book. Because some of what Israel was up to, the things that they did, were just not good. That's when Samuel begins his work and begins the process of the kingship in Israel. So Judges is this really transitional book. And it's looking forward not to the human kings, but rather to the King of Kings. And that's the important thing that we see in this whole book. Let's pray, and we'll launch into the follow-up of Gideon and on into the next section. Father, it's good to be together. Thank you for your word, for teaching us through it. We appreciate the principles that lie behind this story. Help us to apply this to our lives. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so in chapter 6 and 7, we got Gideon, the chopper, who knocked down an Asherah pole and sacrificed his dad's best bull and all of that sort of thing. Then went on to win the battle against the Midianites with a brass band and a torchlight parade. That's a great story. And we think, wow, Gideon is just a really great guy. And it turns out Gideon, like all of the other judges, has feet of clay. The author of this thing, I believe, is probably Samuel, is making the case that human leaders, even when empowered by God himself, almost always fall short. And a human society led by human leaders alone will always fall short of the glory of God. It's never going to be perfect. And it would be wrong for us to expect perfection. We're just not going to get there. There is, in fact, hope, but it's not in electing a better judge or finding a different king or making sure that the correct political party has got all the power. That isn't the answer. The answer comes in our relationship with God. Judges is all about that. So as the Midianites are driven away, by the way, this story of the battle with the Midianites comes up several other places in the Bible, but particularly in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah looks back on this as one of the great moments in Israel's history. So this is not a minor thing. This is actually fairly major. As Gideon gathers his people around him and calls in the additional forces necessary to pursue the Midianites, He tries to arrange for the blockage of the fords of the Jordan. That would be this spot just to the south of the Sea of Galilee, where the Jordan is still a fairly wild river. There's a couple of shallow spots where it is in fact possible to get men and camels across a river without too much trouble most times of the year. And we call those the fords of the Jordan. There's some in the north, south of the Sea of Galilee, and there's some in the south, just north of the Dead Sea. And it depends on where everybody happens to be. So these tribal leaders, Zeba and Zalmunna, took off. The army was in a panic, and off they went. The various tribal units followed after them, and they were chasing them down. But Gideon focused on Zeba and Zalmunna and tried to run them down, and eventually killed them. So it's a big victory, and it's a great thing. Now Ephraim was left out of this. I'm not going to read you the whole story. Ephraim was left out of the chase, and they were a little irritable. So you didn't let us play. And this looked like it would be a fun game, and we really wanted some court time on this one, so call us next time. And it went on. As yeah. Yeah, that's the first part of this chapter. Zeba and Zalmunna, and Oreb and Zeb are the warlords, and Zeba and Zalmunna the kings. And the relationship of the various groups is not terribly complex. This is a tribal thing. The Midianites were divided up into tribal warlordships. And we would call them the Midianites and other eastern peoples. Just in general, the nomadic peoples of the desert fringe gathered around to make trouble. This is a very common thing. And essentially, that's what we're still dealing with today. One of the interesting modern outcomes of this whole tribal thing is a possibility of peace in Israel by means of the rule in local areas of various sheiks, tribal chieftains within the Bedouin tribal traditions, because the local people will listen to them. So if there is some benefit for these tribal leaders to have a position, say in Hebron or in Jenin or in some of the other major areas of Muslim influence, Arab influence, I hesitate to call these folks Palestinian, because they're really not. But if there's a way for that to happen, that could actually be a good thing, and I would be fine with that, because of the tradition. Okay. Okay. In 8 and at verse 22, the men of Israel thought that they would do the same thing that all of the other tribal societies did. When the war was won, you know, the battle was fought and the war was won, they assumed that the warlord would become the next king. That's normal. That's how the ancient world in general did it at the tribal level. And so in 22, the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, So you will be the king, and your son will be the king after you. So we can establish a dynasty. Typically in the ancient world, a dynasty lasted until whatever king it was driven out by somebody else. So somebody with a bigger army or bigger sticks, whatever it took, would jump into the system and beat up a bunch of people, and the older king either died or was put into exile, and the new king established a new dynasty. The dynasties would typically last 2 generations, maybe 3 generations at the outside, and then there'd be discontent, and a new warlord would rise up and toss out the other one. That is precisely what the people of Israel were expecting to do with Gideon. Okay? He's the latest warlord to wipe out the previous warlord, therefore he should be the king. And Samuel's message here in this book is really that we ought to set our sights a tad higher than the most recent thug should become the king. There's got to be a better way, at any rate. So the men of Israel said, rule over us. And Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son. The Lord shall rule over you. Okay, that's the correct answer. But then we see, yet, very important word. Yet is one of those words that lawyers would call weasel words. Okay? Yet. What do you mean, yet? The Lord will rule. I will not be the king. My son will not be the king yet. Okay, here's the small print. Okay, there's a little bit else. Gideon said to them, I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil. Now, the Ishmaelites wore earrings. Okay, well, that's nice to know. The earrings were typically made of gold. Some were made of silver, some were made of bronze, but gold was literally the gold standard. And that was his portable wealth. Okay, he didn't own a lot in life, but he's got an earring. It's like Bart Maverick with a $1,000 bill in his pocket. He's always got something. If everything else fails and the whole world collapses around him, he's got this gold earring and he's got something. It's a tradition. So Gideon said, each one of you give me an earring from all those Ishmaelites that you just got done killing. And they said, well, we'll surely give them. So they spread out a garment, everyone threw in an earring, and the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. Now, it doesn't really matter how much that is. It's a great deal. Okay, that's a lot of gold. At today's market value, it comes up to 6 figures easily. That's a lot of gold. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes and all the other stuff. So Gideon made it into an ephod. An ephod? Okay. And he placed it in his city, Ophrah. And Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and to his household. Now, what's an ephod? In the book of Leviticus, we're told that the high priest is to make an ephod, which appears to be some kind of a jeweled vest, or maybe a breastplate. Something that he wore and was richly ornamented in some way. And for the high priest, that was a means, the method of which is completely mysterious to us, of communicating with God. It was a way to communicate with God. It is entirely possible that Gideon intended for this to be a good thing. Gideon didn't probably intend to create an idol, but he did this high priestly thing, which he really had no right to do. And the ephod itself became an object of confusion for the people of Israel in that area. We don't know exactly what they did, but it turned out to be a bad thing. Should he have made an ephod? Well, no, he's not the high priest and he's not the king. He just said, I'm not going to be your king. He shouldn't have done that. At any rate, that became, because it was an extraordinarily valuable piece, it became an heirloom and ended up becoming some kind of an idol. Here I have, what have I got here? Gideon's ephod. Oh, yeah, well, I know what the thing is on the left. The thing on the right is an idol. That's not an ephod. But it was interesting. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel. They did not lift up their heads anymore for a while, and the land was undisturbed for 40 years. Then Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. Now, okay. Many wives. Now, it's not normal for Old Testament characters to have many wives. We call that a harem. I've got a photograph here of the harem in Istanbul, part of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, back when the Ottoman Empire was a thing. The head man had his harem here. And it's like a huge ornate apartment building. I mean, that's what it is. It's a place where the family lived. And at its height, there were something like 1,200 wives and all of their relatives living there. Lots and lots of children, aunts, uncles, parents, whatever, and everybody lived in this huge harem area. There were private areas where only the caliph or whoever he was could entertain foreign dignitaries and whatnot. Hollywood routinely gets the harem wrong. If you've ever seen some kind of a depiction of an ancient or Arabian type harem, you've been lied to. It wasn't that. For the most part, it was extraordinarily mundane and must have been a dreadful thing for the women involved. Essentially, a kind of slavery. Not a pleasant thing for any of them. For the headman involved, the caliph or whoever was the headman, the purpose of having multiple wives is to do two things. One, to show wealth, because obviously to put up a thing like the Topkapi Palace requires a huge expenditure of money. And of course it's, quote, taxpayers' money. It's, the nice thing about the totalitarian systems is that they work just great as long as you've got other people's money to spend. And so you spend lavishly on a magnificent palace with all of the trimmings, and 1,000 wives is just part of the cost of doing business. And by exhibiting that fabulous wealth that you can afford to do this, everybody else knows that you must be the top of the heap, somebody really important. The other reason for the harem was that most of the wives in the harem were diplomatic marriages. The women themselves were still slaves, but they were the daughters of other kings. So there are lots and lots of other warlords, guys who'd risen to the top of their particular heap by killing the previous king, and they had lots and lots of children as a result of their own harems, and so they would trade wives back and forth, and it was a way of extending the family. The idea being it just wouldn't be right for me to go to war with my brother-in-law, because after all, we're brothers by marriage, this kind of thing. And when you're a brother by marriage with 1,000 different, it starts losing its significance. So Gideon amassed for himself a great fortune, and he put together a household with many, many wives and concubines. The concubine is generally a slave. There's no diplomacy involved. You capture a female in a warfare situation, and she's a slave, and you can do what you want. So there's a concubine, not even named, who happened to be in Shechem, who also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Okay, and scholars argue about the meaning of the name Abimelech, not the literal meaning, but what exactly Gideon had in mind. The name Abimelech, Avi, my father, Ab is father, the yod ending I is the first person pronoun. My father is implied, it's a verbalist clause, the king, Abimelech. So Melech is the king, my father is the king. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. It's a fairly common name in the ancient Near East, given by kings to their eldest son. Okay, so what was Gideon thinking here? Some commentators say that Gideon probably wasn't thinking that. He just said he wouldn't be the king. Okay? And yet he's taking all the trappings of kingship. But I just said I wouldn't be the king. The Lord is going to be the king for you. So my father is the king. Means I'm submissive to my father God. Okay, well, that could be. And for those who've taken that position, I'm willing to give Gideon the benefit of the doubt, if you insist. From my point of view, it looks to me an awful lot like, he made an effort. He shouldn't have done that. That's a kingly thing to do. He made a harem. He shouldn't have done that. That's a very kingly thing to do. And he named his son, one of many, and this one, the daughter of some unnamed concubine from another town nearby. My dad is the king. And I start to wonder. At any rate. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of his father in Ophrah the Abiezrite. And it came about as soon as Gideon was dead. This is verse 33. That the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals. Okay. Gideon died, and the sons of Israel immediately, without waiting for a decent interval or anything, they immediately began taking up with the Baals again. I would like to think that a godly leader with a heroic lineage and doing all of the right things and teaching the right attitudes would get a little more of a bounce than that. You know what I'm saying? But the people of Israel had decided that God was not going to be their king. They were going to go in some other direction, any other direction, and they would not follow the words of God. That was the decision that Israel made, and that's why they suffered. So for 40 years there was no problem, and then it went back. So the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God. Very important word, remember. You don't need to know the Hebrew, zakar, but it's the name Zechariah, the last book of the Old Testament, or not one of the last books in the Old Testament. He remembers the Lord. The people of Israel did not remember. They forgot. And the reason they forgot is that as a society made up of families, they had failed to teach the truth. They let people go off in any direction they wanted to. Now, I'm all for freedom and liberty and all of that. But at the core, the family has to insist that society as a whole teach the truth. And the people of Israel failed there. So it's not the king's fault. There was no real king. It's not God's fault. He had provided his words. It showed them to be authentic by miracle. The prophets had been clear, and they chose not to follow. Okay. Nor did they show kindness to the household of Jeroboam, that is Gideon, in accordance with all of this. And chapter 9 takes us into, here we have Gideon's death. Yeah. Abimelech's rebellion, and I don't need to take you all the way through Gideon's rebellion, or Abimelech's rebellion. It's predictable that Gideon had not taught this son anything of real value. So Abimelech assumed that since his name was, my dad is the king, that he would be the next king, and he decided to assert that claim in Shechem. We mentioned before, I think, that Shechem is a major city. It has a whole lot of background. This is a view of Shechem from the east. We went through here early in the morning, so I've got a big shadow. Sorry. You know, sometimes you can't pick the time of day that you go where you go. But the main road misses Shechem by a bit. You have to go in. The two mountains, Ebal on the right and Gerizim on the left. Gerizim has some trees. Ebal is kind of bald. That's how we remember. And Ebal is farther to the north. Halfway up Mount Ebal, on this side, in that bit of a depression, is a spot where Joshua probably built his altar. There's an Iron Age altar that dates from a later time, still up there. And Israeli archaeologists continue to argue about it, but I think it's pretty likely that that's the right place and it was intended to be the right kind of altar. At any rate, this is Shechem. Now Shechem goes way, way back. Shechem is an old town. We first run into Shechem in the patriarchal narratives when Jacob is coming back. He and his sons have a run-in with Shechem and the rape of Dinah and the destruction of all of the men in Shechem, the taking of their wives to produce a kind of a half-caste society. Shechem was considered family in much the same way that Edom and Moab and Ammon, the Transjordanian nations, were considered family. when Moses came through that area, he asked permission. Could we have permission to take the king's highway through Moab? And the king of Moab said no. So Moses ended up taking the long way around, which is really quite a long way around. And that's the Balaam narrative that's happening there in the book of Numbers. Later on, he crossed over the Arnon Gorge and ran into the city of Heshbon, which was somebody else entirely. I think that was Og, king of Heshbon. And Og was just defeated. He was not family. And so it's all kind of, who's family and who isn't. It's tough to keep track without a program. That Shechem was family. And so the idea of setting up a kingdom in Shechem is not far-fetched. So Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives, spoke to them, and to the whole clan of the household of his mother's father, saying, "Speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that one man rule over you. Also remember that I am your bone and flesh." Okay, so there's 70 sons of Gideon are the sons of his official wives. The group that live actually in the harem. The concubine in Shechem is just a girlfriend that he visited from time to time. How do you... I'm sorry, I can't treat Gideon with a whole lot of respect. I should try, because he's not as bad as he could possibly be. But he's awful bad. So you've got Jerubbaal. He goes to his mother's relatives and gets a thing going. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal Berit. Okay, 70 pieces of silver. That's not much. But it's a little bit of a... It's a bit of a nest egg to get your campaign started. That's about what it was worth. Baal Berit is the Baal of the covenant. In other words, a Baal that was worshipped in Shechem on either Gerizim or Ebal, probably. There are high places on both mountains. So we don't know which one is Baal Berit. It doesn't matter very much. And Abimelech hired some worthless and reckless fellows, and they followed him. So he put together a gang. And they followed him as long as the silver lasted. And they went to his father's house at Oprah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem and Bet Milo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar which is in Shechem. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim and lifted up his voice and said, "Listen to me, O men of Shechem, that God may only listen to you." Once the trees went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Shall I leave my fatness with which God and men are honored and go to wave over the trees?" And then the trees said to the fig tree, "You come, reign over us." And the fig tree said to them, "Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go wave over the trees?" Then the tree said to the vine, "You come, reign over us." But the vine said, "Shall I leave my new wine, which cheers God and men, and go wave over the trees?" Finally, all the trees said to the bramble, "You come, reign over us." And the bramble said, "If in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the Lebanon of cedar," or the cedars of Lebanon. Okay, what's this? That's an allegory. This is one of the very few actual allegories in the Bible. Okay? I'm just telling you that because it's popular to approach most of the Bible as though it's full of allegory. An allegory is a story about natural things that has a spiritual meaning. And so a story about trees reigning over other trees is an allegory, just by definition. Usually, a story like this that has allegorical significance is made clear in the context. We don't have the right to come to just any passage in the Old Testament particularly and say, well, this is obviously allegorical, because most of the time it isn't obvious to anybody. But it sometimes needs to be if your theology demands it. I salute those who go that way, but it doesn't work very well. So what's the story about? Well, the story is all about Abimelech being the worthless king. He's the bramble bush. You've chosen Abimelech as your king. Bad move. Bad move. And you're going to suffer for that. Pete?
Is Jotham invoking a curse?
Yes.
Because he's on Mount Gerizim, which isn't that the blessing and the curse when they came into the land?
Yeah. It could well be. The choice of Gerizim to invoke a curse on Abimelech would be, that would be likely. This isn't what it says exactly, but he's definitely not saying anything nice about Abimelech. Okay, the allegory here is all about Abimelech. It is a blatantly political hit job, and what can you say? And as I've said before, folks, this is Judges. It just gets worse. The one bright spot in the whole string of the Judges story is the book of Ruth, which starts out, now in the days in which the judges were judging, all of this happened. Normal people doing normal things in adorably normal ways, serving God to the best of their knowledge. That's what the majority of people were actually doing at this time, and yet the core of Israel's society was being led by people who were increasingly immoral, ungodly, and likely to not get better. So, Jotham goes on, basically says, if you're being entirely honest and above board and making Abimelech king, then the Lord bless you. But if not, God will bring down destruction. He says, let fire come out of Abimelech and consume the men of Shechem and Bet Milo. Let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from Bet Milo and consume Abimelech. And then Jotham escaped and went to Beer, which is simply a word that means the well. We would like it to be Beersheba, but it doesn't say that. And he may not have gone that far. So Shechem and Abimelech fall. Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. And an evil spirit, God sent an evil spirit. The term evil spirit, by the way, does not normally mean a demon in the Old Testament. It means something like a foul consensus, a mindset into the people of Israel, where they begin believing crazy things and begin being angry with one another. So this is the sort of thing that leads to a civil war. When you find people are divided over things that really don't matter very much, and they fail to unite around that which alone can provide unity, then conflict will happen. There was conflict. So we get the story. God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. Well, he lasted for 3 years. That's better than most ancient kings. He didn't do too badly. We've got one in, I think, 1 Kings, Omri and somebody else. Okay, so the men of Omri proved to be stronger than the men of somebody else. And so, what was his name? Tibni. And so Tibni died. Ah, he just died? Well, no, I doubt that. I suspect one of Omri's men killed him, but, you know, some of this is not very pretty. So the men of Shechem set an ambush against Abimelech. This is verse 25. And it was told to Abimelech, now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his relatives and crossed over into Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their trust in him. And they went out into the field and gathered grapes of their vineyards and trod them and held a festival. And they ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. And then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not just the son of Jerubbaal? Is not Zebul not his lieutenant? Serve the men of Hamor, the men of Shechem. Why should we serve him? Hamor and the men of Shechem go all the way back to the original Canaanite founders of Shechem. They're divided all over the place. Okay. And Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, and his anger burned, and he sent messengers, and he's stirring up this, and he's stirring up that. And this thing just gets uglier and uglier until finally Abimelech is killed. Ends up, the Bet Milo is a house of the tower, and from the tower, as I recall, somebody dropped a rock on him. And I've forgotten how he died. Is it how is it? They entered the inner chamber, people cut down one of the branches. No, he was burned in it. Okay, a certain woman, she doesn't even have a name. This isn't even jail. Okay? We don't know if this was somebody's mother. I'd like to think it was, but who knows? Dropped a millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. This is verse 53. As I said, this is not a pretty story. Okay? So the kingdom of Shechem lasted 3 years, and they finally gave up on it. And the city was divided over who they should follow, but Abimelech, at the very least, was dead. Okay, chapter 10, which means I'm going to have to go back and come now. Let us reason together, said the iPad. Sure. Okay. 10 through 16 is the latter judges. We're going to start out with some minor judges, but along the way, we're going to see Jephthah. I'm just going to get started on Jephthah today. Jephthah is an interesting character in a lot of ways. He starts out with less of an honorable tradition even than Gideon. He's not merely the least of his tribe. He is barely part of his tribe as well. Jephthah is an interesting character. Jephthah, the Gileadite, let's start in 10. After Abimelech died, Tola, son of Puah, son of Dodo. How would you like to be the son of Dodo? Seriously, it actually has meaning in the ancient world. I know that Dodi is my beloved, so Dodo is from that root. So it's a nice thing, but still, how would you like to be the son of Dodo? A man of Issachar rose to save Israel, and he lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. We've never found Shamir With the Ephraim is entirely hill country. We have no other record of Tola. Okay. He judged Israel 23 years. He died and was buried in Shamir. That's all we know. After him, Jair, the Gileadite, judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. And they had 30 cities in the land of Gilead that are called Havoth Jair to this day. Havoth Jair means the tents of Jair. So the 30 cities were groupings of tents, one for each of the sons, with room inside, no doubt, for their donkeys. We don't know much about him. And Jair died and was buried in Kaman, and we don't know where Kaman is. Okay, why do I tell you all this story? Because this was a complex time. There's a lot of things going on. The minor judges are named because they're a part of history, but they really didn't have any significance in the story. And so Samuel, I think, skips them, essentially, puts their names down, and there they are. Then the sons of Israel, this is 10:6, again did the evil thing in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the sons of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines. This is the first time we get a lengthy list of all of the various gods. If I were to take time, I could show you the statues, the idols that we have of most of these gods. We can track all of these. They're all related, of course, to the basic ancient fertility religions. The ancient people believed that the created world was supreme. They believed the created world was eternal. It had no real creator, or at least not for all practical purposes. And that the created things needed to be appeased. So these various religions are all built around the same core idea. Today we'd call it environmentalism or something like that. But in the ancient world, it was simply appeasing the gods who control the natural world. And that's mostly done by eating well, getting drunk, and finding yourself some more women. That's all of these ancient religions were the same way. They were thus very attractive to the younger generation coming up without instruction. So different from our own world. Okay, and the anger of the Lord. This is 10:7, and it's a key verse. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the sons of Ammon. Okay, this gives you the final idea. This is different from the previous problems where there was a localized thing. So you've got Eglon, the Bedouin king who came to Jericho and set up his outpost. Okay, and that was local. This is big. God decided to sell the people of Israel, mostly the southern part from Ephraim south through Judah, into the hands of the Ammonites, who are centered around the modern city of Amman, Jordan, the Jordanians, and the Philistines. The Philistines, in the days that this is being described, had 5 cities in the area that we today speak of as Gaza, and also somewhat north of there. Ashkelon and Ashdod are actually north of the modern Gaza Strip, but that area of the coastline. the Philistines were pushing toward the interior. They began to be a military problem for Israel around 1200 BC. My archaeology mentor, David Osishkin, insists that the correct date is 1178, but frankly, do we really care? I mean, around 1200 BC, if you can remember that much, you're better than most of my students. So that's about the time we start seeing them. The Philistines are given the credit for destroying the Hittite Empire, which had previously destroyed the Mitanni in Mesopotamia, and then moving down the coast to neutralize, to fight to a standstill with Egypt. So in the south you have Egypt, in the east you have north and east all of Mesopotamia, from Syria down through Iraq and Iran, all of that territory, and to the northwest you have all of Asia Minor, which was controlled by the Hittites. So all of the major powers have been taken off the table at this time. Okay? While the cats are occupied otherwise, the mice will play. And so what we're seeing in the book of Judges and on into the period of the rise of the monarchy under Saul and David and Solomon is Israel, amongst the other mice of the area, establishing a kingdom. And this will ultimately be the Davidic kingdom in Judea. But the major powers go through roughly 200 years of hiatus, where they're simply off on one side doing nothing. It's interesting to read the history of the period, because we find, for instance, one of the oldest accurately recorded land battles in history happens in 1278 BC, I believe, the Battle of Kadesh. And this is the place where the Egyptians under Ramses II confronted the Hittites. Okay, and they fought to a standstill. After 1280 BC, the Egyptians really never went past that spot, Kadesh on the Orontes River in Syria. And that was the spot. It is very well documented, and it's a great story, and I'm not going to tell you, but you can look for that. Look for Kadesh on the Orontes with Ramses. And a big battle and chariots and all kinds of stuff, and Ramses got his chestnuts pulled out of the fire just at the last moment by a group of naval cadets. Who knew, on some kind of maneuver. And that was the end of Egypt. The Hittites went back and eventually took out their frustration by wiping out the Mitanni. It made sense to the Hittites. Okay, who knows what's going on? And so all three are off the table. When the Philistines came through, they found the Hittites weak and distracted. The Mitanni were already gone. The Egyptians could just barely keep the Philistines from going further. So the Philistines settled along the coast of Israel. Now, there are earlier mentions of Philistines, and that continues to give us problems. Sometimes we say, well, this is just anachronistic because most of those have Semitic names, and that works for me. I'm okay with that. That isn't a good answer, but it's the best we've got. Just recognizing that we've got Philistines all the way back to Abraham. Okay, well, somehow. At this point, the Philistines in the west and the Ammonites in the east both become hostile at the same time. Those of you who've been to Israel know that Israel is not a big country. There's not a whole lot of depth. So the distance from the Philistine country, for example, to the boundary of the Ammonite country is about the distance from here to Coeur d'Alene. I can remember watching Israeli fighter jets on maneuvers. You know, they have to go out and fly, and they have to go out and dogfight and do all of this stuff because that's how you stay current. It's very, very important. So they go out and play. But mostly, if they want to go fast, they point it out over the Mediterranean Sea. They go off they go, and then they come back after a while. If they want to mix it up with somebody else, everything has to be vertical. They go straight up in the air, and they do then down, and they run around and go. And it looks very spectacular, but one of the main things that it tells you is if you go very far in a straight line in Israel, you're over enemy territory right away quick. I mean, there are radars from all over the place watching this. In the ancient world, it's not quite as quick, but it's really, really quick. And to have Ammonites on one side and Philistines on the other, both putting pressure on the central hill country, which would be Jerusalem, both putting pressure at the same time, is a killer. That's really difficult. And this particular tension is going to exist through most of the early kingdom period. It's David who finally settles this out. And it's going to take a while. And the issue that we get with Jephthah is with the Ammonites. And that particular problem is what gives rise to this whole story with Jephthah. And everybody wants to know, did he really sacrifice his daughter? And we'll get to that next week. That's where we'll be. Thanks for coming.